Welcome once again, ladies and gentlemen, to the final part of the Security Token Crash Course. For your viewing and learning pleasure, my name, as always, is Craig Gulovsen, attorney at law, principal at the Gulovsen Law Office. Congratulations on making it this far through the course. But since I know you have better things to do than listen to me ramble on about myself, let's get right to it. Part 3, entitled, How Do You Actually Make a Security Token Offering Compliant? Here we go. The information presented in this course is provided for educational, informational, and entertainment purposes only without any express or implied warranty of any kind. It is not intended to be and does not constitute legal, financial, investment, trading, or any other advice. This course does not establish a lawyer-client relationship between you, me, or anyone else at Gulovsen Law Office. All the information presented is general in nature and is not specific to you or anyone else. Do not make any decisions based on any of the information presented in this course without first consulting a licensed attorney. We've talked about what security. Don't worry about that anymore. We talk about what are the rules and requirements. We talk about what they are. Now we got to talk about how to follow them and how to do it, because this is really the big question and where all the money's been going to fund these platforms. So how do you do it? This is a subject I will come back to, and it's not just being self-promotional, because you don't have to hire me. You can hire any attorney who is competent in this kind of work. And especially if it's not US or Canada or North America, I'm not your guy anyway. You'd want to find somebody else who knows those other jurisdictions, or you might need a couple of attorneys. And if it's not you, the project you're working with should have an attorney involved, at least one who knows this stuff. If they don't have an attorney at all, you need to get away from there or make sure they get one, I guess. Or, as a founder, you have to, everybody I've talked to in the space now is doing security token to, whether issuance platform founders, the first thing I say is talk to an attorney as early as possible. You don't have to hire him, bring him on as a retainer full-time or anything like that, but just have a conversation with an attorney about the outlines of what you're trying to do, just so you can have some basic guidance to start with, and then you can come back to that attorney or find another one or whatever. But you do need legal guidance to do this right. You cannot do it on your own. Some jurisdictions claim to be easier than others, but I've heard that even like Malta, and they've got some very strict rules. And if you mess them up, I was like Singapore with that. The lawyers actually posted something on LinkedIn about a private sale, which I think would have been like the equivalent of the 506B rule, where we were talking about earlier in the U.S. and Singapore authorities. I think they halted the sale until they could do it, and then they had to register. And again, in that case, it was the lawyers who screwed that up. Good job, lawyers. But it just shows you that every jurisdiction is challenging. Once you acknowledge the security, they all have very specific rules you have to follow, and you need to make sure you're working with someone who knows those rules and who can guide you the right way. Some of the stuff I think you can probably build yourself if you have the technological ability, but again, they all anything you build has to implement the rules, whether it's the restrictions we talked about, or on the onboarding or the website you're building, making sure that if you're doing a 506B, for example, nobody can see anything that has anything to do with a private sale that you're doing, unless someone in the founders have communicated with them personally, individually. So there should be nothing on your website that says anything about this. You can talk about your company generally and the kind of work you do in the business that you're trying to build, but no reference whatsoever to fundraising at all under a 506B. So whether you work with a service provider, it can either be like a security token issuance platform or what I call a compliance partner, which is kind of a general catch-all term that refers to some companies out there that don't necessarily do the platforms. But I'm just going to go through real quickly what an issuance platform is and then a compliance partner, just so you have an idea. And I guarantee you guys are going to recognize some of this stuff if you've worked with ICOs and been involved with directly or indirectly with like ICO dashboards. The security token issuance platforms are similar in that they always typically offer a website because everything's online, obviously. It does have to be compliant though, and the things I talked about, like the walls you have to get through. Even with the ICOs, a lot of times they'd ask, if they were blocking people from the US, they would ask, are you a US resident? Or they'll ask you, try to figure out your IP address and block you that way. So you have to go through these sort of security gates before you can get to the information you're looking for. The platforms have all that typically built in. You've got the onboarding process that gathers personal information, does like the KYC/AML. It's really KYC that's most important here, but AML to a lesser extent. And then a funding mechanism, because obviously if you're asking people for money, you better give them a way to give you the money. Otherwise, it's kind of a waste of time. You've got token deployment and minting that actually creates and distributes the tokens to wallets. And then this last thing, which is called lifecycle management, which I'll talk about in the next slide. But you'll notice like those first four things that are highlighted in red right now, those are very similar and pretty much identical with the extra security protections that they're very similar to what the ICOs had with their ICO platforms. Okay, so moving on to the next slide, let's talk about this thing called lifecycle management, because in many ways, this is the key to all of the security token mystery. And we've touched on a little bit of it before, and this is going to directly answer some of the stuff you were asking about. You think about ICOs like what you're doing with tokens. What do? You announce the token sale, you issue them, you distribute them. When the token sale is done, after you collected your money or whatever, and you burn whatever, the portion if you're supposed to be doing that. And then you get it listed on an exchange, and then your community's happy, and they show their happiness by dumping all your tokens and driving the price down to zero. The point is that once that's done, you don't really have to worry about the tokens so much anymore because, one, they're not worth anything, but even if they are kind of worth something, you might try to do things to hopefully bring their value up that are ethical and legal. We won't go into any of those because I'm not sure about too many of those that are. At least no one wanted to do it the right way. But the point is that lifecycle management of your token is pretty much done at that point. Now, security tokens are the exact opposite of that because the lifecycle management never really ends. It may end for a particular, like a series of tokens. And if you think about like with stock, you've got like Series A, Series B of stock. Same concept. They may be redeemed and then new replacements issued. Same thing happens with tokens. So a new life cycle begins, but still, to the extent that your company is issuing these security tokens, you're still doing the same stuff. You're still managing this. And I think the best way to understand this, if any of you have bought stock online or, like in the US, you use Schwab or E-Trade, or I don't even know if they have Ameritrade anymore, but when you buy stock online, what happens is you buy it on the computer or whatever, and then you probably get like prospectus in the mail that from the company, Apple or whoever it is, saying thanks for joining the Apple family. Here's about our company. There's lots of pretty pictures and stuff, talking about all the money they're making and graphs and charts, and that is your prospectus. And they got that information when you bought the stock because it was provided through the service that you logged into, whether you bought it on E-Trade or used a stockbroker or whatever. The information got to them and they got the stuff to you because you own that stock now. And if you sell it to somebody else, the Apple stock, for instance, the shares of Apple, then you're going to stop getting that prospectus in the mail. You'll probably get the tax forms at the end of the year or the beginning of next year so you can file your taxes for the last time you owned it. But that's it. You're done. You're not, unless there's an error or something. After you sell that stock, you won't hear from it. But the new person, they're going to know who the new person is and they're going to send them stuff. The exact same thing happens with security tokens and has to happen. Now, I was using the publicly traded securities like an Apple stock, which is publicly traded on the public exchanges, just to give an example, but we're not really talking about public, but even privately traded, like alternative trading services, whether you're in the US, like you're talking about like Pink Sheets or what they call penny stocks, that sort of thing. You still have to follow those kinds of rules where you need to know who it is that owns the stock and track it. And in this case, the same thing with tokens. So anonymity, just get rid of that concept. That does not exist in the world of security tokens. You're not supposed to have anonymous security token holders at all under any circumstance. Not in the US. Again, we're just talking about US. But you have to know who they are and not just by a hash function or string of characters. You actually need to know their name because they may not. How else do you know if they're accredited or not? How else do you know if they live in a country where it's permissible for, or where you know that you're following their laws? So you have to block them. You need to know who they are at all times. And if they sell or try to sell the shares, then you need to keep your cap tables updated so that basically at any point in time, you need to know exactly who owns how much equity or security tokens that you've issued and how, the valuation. You have to know that at basically a snapshot in time. Oh, here, I do need to mention this because this is the sort of thing, the blockchain purists, this is the thing that makes them very uncomfortable, understandably. In the case of Bitcoin, if you send your Bitcoin to a bad address, you mistype something, it's gone. I mean, you don't call up Bitcoin Central, say, hey man, I lost my tokens or my Bitcoin, can I get those back, please? I mean, first of all, there's nobody to call. And even if there was, they would just laugh at you and hang up because that's not how it works. It's gone. The only way that it would not be gone is if it went to an address that someone, I guess, actually claimed or had, and they saw that you made this mistake and they felt bad for you and they sent it back to you. That's the only way you get your Bitcoin back. But in the case of security tokens, that's not how it works. If someone loses their security tokens, guess what? You have to give them back to them. Now, does not mean that you're necessarily changing the ledger. The ledger can still be immutable, but what you're doing is you're entering a new transaction that says, okay, Chucklehead lost these security tokens, so now we have to cancel out these that were there before and reissue them to Chucklehead and family. And that's how you do it. Same thing like with clawback is where the transaction takes place and they're not lost, but they just go to the wrong people. They're going to people who like aren't accredited, or they're in a jurisdiction that it's not appropriate for them to be holding these securities. You have to be able to basically cancel the transaction and give the security tokens back to the people who made the transaction improperly. That's called clawback. And again, that goes against at least the concept of, it's not immutability that you're messing with, but it is, if you make a mistake, if Bitcoin is gone. In this instance, it's not gone. You have to give it back because that's what the law requires. I'll just go through the rest of these real quick. You got governance solutions. So if you allow proxy voting with the tokens, you have to, number one, give people a way to vote. And number two, make sure that the votes count. You have to be able to do that somehow, either through on the smart contract or however you do it. You can do it manually. There's lots of different ways to do it, but you have to do it. Distribution support, if you're going to offer things like dividends, equity, or more important, like interest, things like that. And here's a suggestion. If you're not giving your token holders some additional benefit like this, then they're not going to buy your tokens, because all you're basically doing is you're issuing utility tokens effectively again, they're not necessarily utility tokens, but they have the same value as utility tokens. They're worth a hell of a lot less because they have to hold them for a damn year before they can dump them. So no one's going to buy that from you. So you have to give them something else, whether it's equity or dividends. And I know there's some of you, maybe not in this class, but who, for whatever reason, got in your head that the VC model is wrong. I shouldn't have to give up any equity in my company, blah, blah, blah. Sorry, that's not really how the real world works. And that's part of the reason why the ICO market crashed. That's my personal opinion. Some of you may disagree, but you have to give people something of value besides just a promise that you're going to build something cool that'll make the tokens worth a lot, because I have yet to see that actually happen. Thousands of people talked about it. $13 billion was raised to do it, and I have yet to see it. So with that said, you have to give them something else. And these are examples of the things you have to give them, and you have to figure out a way to make sure that they can get them. Just telling them they get dividends is fine, but you actually have to be able to distribute them to them. Here's another big one. Compliance upgrades, meaning that if the law changes, and like on a public blockchain and you have smart contracts that were out on the mainnet, if the law changed and you had to and your smart contract was just wrong, the only way to stop it that I'm aware of is you have to basically kill it, if you can, kill the smart contract, and then reissue, put a new one on mainnet, and then reissue tokens and do a token swap to get the new tokens that are following the new rules out there. That's the only way to do it. Now, think of all the hundreds of jurisdictions, national, state level, and worldwide, and all the laws that change. If every time a law changed, every single security token that might be covered by it, because the jurisdiction applied, they'd have to do that every single time. Kill the smart contract. And I've been through a smart contract hack with one of my clients, and it was nasty. Took several months to finally get it resolved. You'd be having rules change multiple times a day in some cases. So it's impossible. You have to be able to have some way to change the rules on the fly. How do you do that? I'm not a software developer, so I'm not going to answer that question, but that is one of the things that people are working on right now. And finally got restriction support, which I always forget that I don't really need a whole slide for this, for the restriction support. But anyway, these last 5 things, if you notice, should not look familiar to you because they're not anything like ICOs. Unlike the last slide where the first 4 things were just like the ICO dashboards, these are nothing like ICOs because it's totally different. It's what makes them different. The restriction thing I'll go through real fast because we already talked about it. Whether you are just issuing to accredited investors or not, that's one of the restrictions. Whether they have to hold on to them for a year or not, that's another one. Well, I guess they all do, in the US at least. Now, as far as the limit, this is important. Definitely something to keep in mind. It's not under the Securities Act of 1933, but the Securities Exchange Act of 1934. I haven't covered it yet, but the number of investors you can have cannot exceed 1,999. Okay, this is hugely important. Now, for people who did ICOs, we had presumably thousands and thousands of people participating and giving small amounts of money. The thing is, if you can only have 1,999 investors, if you're raising, trying to raise $10 million or $20 million, think about what that means. It means that the minimum raise you can have from each of the investors is I think, I'm trying to do this math in my head, it's 10,000, I think is right. 5 or 10,000, depending on whether you're doing 10 or 20 million. So that's the minimum that you're going to be accepting for people. So just keep that in mind. I mean, you don't have, you don't have to raise 10 or 20 million. You can raise a lot less than that, in which case the numbers don't have to be so high. But that's what we're talking about when we're talking about securities tokens. This is not democratizing investing. This is not about mom and pop or Uncle Joey or whatever his name is in the dumpster being able to invest. It's not what this is about. It really is more like the hated VC model or whatever. I've got my own views on that, which I'll keep to myself. I'm happy to chat with anybody on it later. But that's what we're talking about with security tokens. So it's just raising money from people who are accredited and have money. Again, this is in the U.S. The rules are much different in other jurisdictions. Just make sure you do the multiplication so that you are able to meet your goals and that the minimum amount that you are requesting from contributors is sufficient. One of the questions is, where does all this stuff occur? And in some cases, it's going to be on the smart contract. Is going to enforce some restrictions because it's just a primary issuance. But once it goes past that, then what happens? And that's where the issue of whether the tokens can be tradable on, should the tokens be allowed to be traded on only regulated exchanges, or should they be designed in such a way that theoretically someone could, if it's on a public blockchain, trade them on a decentralized exchange? And here's something about security token industry that a lot of the players don't want to admit, is it's still, well, everybody knows it's young, but I mean, they're still trying to figure out some of this stuff. I mean, they have not figured out all of the answers to these questions, and I'm not avoiding the answer because I don't know it. It's because no one's figured out yet. It's not because it exists and I don't know what it is. It just has not been done. And to the extent that any of you might want to, I mean, that's an area too, just from a career standpoint. If that's something you're interested in and want to and have thoughts on, I mean, these are the hot button issues that a lot of those the issuance platforms, compliance partners are working through right now. So definitely, that's something to look into if that's your forte and you're a developer, for instance. So the obvious next question is which of these service providers should you use, if any? There's a company called Vertalo that maintains a website called the Security Token Ecosystem. I've included the link on the screen, and all of the next few slides are just screenshots from that particular website. I'm not going to give any specific advice as to any of these companies, but I did want to present them to you so that you can see all the various options. What I would say is that it's important, depending on your role with a project that might be considering doing a security token offering or a digital securities offering, that you have an opportunity to talk to as many of these companies as you can. Some of them have similar services. Some of them have quite different services. It's very important that you're comfortable with them. Absolutely ask them the tough questions, because one of the things I want everyone to take away from this class is that the security token quote-unquote ecosystem is still in development. It's not finished, and there are going to be service providers that are not able to provide the level of service that you necessarily need for your particular project. So it's very important that you ask them the tough questions and don't assume that if they didn't cover something that it's all right, it's going to be included, because that's actually not true at all. So first of all, we have compliance, and these are the companies that provide the non-technical, I guess I'd call it, a lot of the non-technical services like Know Your Customer, KYC, AML, that check for accredited investor status. That's another one. Some of these service providers, Vertalo itself provides a multitude of services dealing with sort of the lifecycle management that we talked about. So moving on to a few more categories. A broker-dealer, that's something I did not really cover very much in this course. I mentioned them once or twice in passing. I will say that they are important, and it's a very good idea. If you only have two compliance partners, having a broker-dealer would most likely be at the top of that list, right along with almost as, if not equally important to, an attorney. And again, these are just some examples. There's no specific requirement to be licensed as a broker-dealer for security tokens versus other securities. So there are multitudes of options out there. These are just some examples of ones that are focused on the digital securities industry. On the legal side, there are some several law firms, and since I'm an attorney, I feel it'd be kind of inappropriate to necessarily point out, one in particular that anyone should be focused on. So I'll just leave it up there, and you guys can go check out the website yourself and decide if there are any law firms listed there that would be appropriate to use. Again, that's entirely up to you guys. I'm sure you saw what I did there. Anyway, okay, so moving on to the issuance. This is the issuance platforms that I had mentioned. All of these companies that build and can offer the sort of ICO dashboard-ish type of front ends, and some of them, they have varying degrees of additional functionality. Some of them do offer some of the lifecycle management services. Some of them offer none of them. And once again, it's important. I'm not going to tell you which ones are which, because honestly, anything I tell you now would probably be wrong, because they're changing and adding on so frequently. But it's imperative that you just talk to them and find out which ones offer the services that you need. And hopefully your attorney and or broker dealer that you're working with will be able to advise you as to exactly what those services are. Finally, we've got trading and custody. Custody is another thing I've not really touched on, and I'm just including that here. I'm not going to talk about it in this course because it's just, I think, outside the scope, but they are listed. That's the other category. But the trading, that's obviously important. This one I really do need to make some comments on, though. Just because a secondary trading platform is listed here as a security token exchange does not necessarily mean that it is compliant. I'm not going to name any names. Some of you who have been in the industry and especially have dealt with ICOs might recognize one or two names on this list and be surprised that they're claiming that they are able to list security tokens compliantly. I'm equally surprised, but again, I'm not going to comment on any in particular. So Open Finance Network, which is actually the little small circle, does look like a lifesaver. Would that be wintergreen? Maybe. Open Finance Network was the first that I'm aware of to begin actively trading security tokens in a compliant manner. That's the only way I guess I know how to put it, because I can't say for sure, but I mean, that's the understanding I have, is that they are the most compliant. Now, T0 came on recently. Templum has also been around for a while. They've done some work with real estate, but I would simply defer to your legal counsel and any other partners you're working with to advise you on which of these platforms would be the most appropriate moving forward. All of these service providers, all of these compliance partners, you can just click through directly to their website from these diagrams, from these images, and there's also a listing at the bottom of the ecosystem page that you can access all of them and just reach out to them directly. So I think that covers it for them. All right, so now on to the recap. How do you make a security token offering compliant? How do you do it? Number one, first and foremost, make sure there's an attorney involved in the process from as early as possible. Because even if you just talk generally about it on a website before you hire your attorney, yeah, we're thinking about doing a security token offering, and we'll keep everybody updated when we do it, and then your attorney comes in and says, oh well, you can't publish anything about it, and then you don't do anything. Guess what? It doesn't matter, because you already blew it. You lost that exemption if you were trying to do 506B, because you put something out there about the fact you're doing it. You're done. You're going to get in trouble if you try to use that exemption, because you just can't use it. So get an attorney involved as early as possible. And then it's a very good idea. I think you really have to. I mean, I don't see how you can do it compliantly without at least having some sort of a partnership in place with some of these companies to at least give you some guidance, because it's just way too complicated. Congratulations. You suffered through an hour and a half of me talking, and I hope you learned something. As I tell every class, you may not now be an expert. In fact, you're not an expert in security tokens, but I can guarantee that you know probably more than most people who claim to be experts. I see the class as sort of an ongoing conversation. If you guys have any questions at all, feel free to send me an email. My email address, you got my website and my LinkedIn too. Please feel free to. The way I do it is, as long as you're not asking me for specific legal guidance on a project that you are working on, I'm not going to do that for free. But if you have general questions, just generally about security tokens, or if you're thinking about maybe working on a project but you have some questions about it, as long as you're not using that opportunity to get free legal advice that you can communicate to the founders that you're going to go work with, I'm happy to answer those questions free of charge, as long as I have time. I mean, that's always obviously the overriding factor. But if I have time to do it and it's not specific to a particular project or it's going to be used for a specific project, I'm happy to give you my general opinion on that. So before I say farewells, everyone, I wanted to thank you once again for taking the time to learn about these things called security tokens or digital securities. If you have not done so already, I would encourage you to go to my website, Gulovsen.io, and I will put a link on the homepage to join the mailing list so that any new updated videos you will be notified of immediately. Also, if you know anybody else who might benefit from these videos, please share it. So with that, it's been a pleasure, and until the next time, whenever that may be.